Ready? Okay. My name is Jade Metters. I am a firefighter on Engine 21A shift. I've been on the department for 4 years now. And today we're going to talk about overhaul. If anybody needs to use the restroom, that's the door and down the hall to the right. Please put your phones on silent or turn them off. Or if you have to take a call, just step outside. So we're going to talk about overhaul. I think overhaul is kind of like, I don't say the stepchild, but when you think about firefighting, it's the less glamorous side of firefighting, I guess. Most people, when they envision firefighters or firefighting, they envision themselves on the end of a nozzle, not pulling drywall or ceiling. And when you're on the end of a nozzle, you got a lot of adrenaline. There's not a big adrenaline rush in overhaul. So it's like the stepchild a little bit of firefighting. Like this guy, he's got a nice shovel here. I mean, that's not very glamorous. Who wants to be on the end of a shovel? And we'll also note that he doesn't have any kind of SCBA or mask on. We'll get to that as well. Safety, obviously, like everything else in firefighting, is a big deal. So we're going to define overhaul, talk about what it is, and all safety concerned with it, what you need to do safety-wise before you ever begin overhaul, and safety during overhaul. I want to talk about the tools that you use. There are tons of tools for overhaul. You do so many different things. And also your senses, always being aware of your environment and using those when you're performing overhaul. Always on the fire scene, obviously, but and where to do overhaul. So here's a good fire scene. Obviously, the fire's been put out, and it looks like this guy might be a total loss. He got some pretty good heat over here. It's melted the neighbor's house. On this particular scene, I want to note that nobody has SCBA on, or they have SCBAs but no mask. I don't see a whole lot of tools being used. I see some personal lights and the charge. At least they have a charge line in there with them, which is a big rule. What are you going to do for overhaul if you don't have anything to put the embers or the smokers up that you find? But that's what an overall scene can look like. So the process of searching for and extinguishing pockets of fire that remain after a fire has been brought under control. That's our definition. And I think this is super important. It says after a fire has been brought under control. Because a fire is not considered to be out until a thorough overhaul is done. I think that overhaul, a department's reputation can hinge on how thorough a job they do on an overhaul. Because you put the fire out the first time, but if you don't do a good overhaul and rekindles, you should just let it burn to the ground the first time. And again, it's not fun work, and it's not glamorous work, but it's super important work. It's like the meat and potatoes of what we do. It's like, I played basketball for years, and you always heard people say, the defense does all the work and the offense gets all the credit. It's kind of like fighting a fire. Whoever's on the end of the nozzle kind of gets all the credit, and overhaul does a lot of the grunt work. One thing to know also about overhaul is it's physically demanding. And you don't start overhaul until you've been on the scene for several hours. You know, you're already worked up a good sweat, you're tired, the tanks that we have are super heavy. You know, you're tired when you start overhaul. It's important to note, you know, you find when you're pulling down drywall on the ceiling and the walls and floors, the smallest little ember can be the cause of a rekindle. So it's so important that you go through every nook and cranny, making sure you're thorough and getting rid of all that fire. Again, it's strenuous work. All sweat and not much glamour. Again, kind of the stepchild of the fire scene, the work that's done on the fire scene. Again, you're already fatigued by the time you start overhaul. I think this is super interesting. I don't think it's done enough or at all, but I see you should consider bringing in a fresh crew before starting overhaul, because what happens whenever you're tired and you're doing strenuous work?
I have a question, Jade.
Yes, sir.
If you're on the scene and your incident commander tells you to take your gear off and you don't feel comfortable with that, is it okay to leave it on anyway?
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely, and I think that I'm not telling you to question your authorities, but you should always have your PPE on. You're responsible for you. If you want to have your PPE on, we have it on before we get out of the truck, off the engine, to the end of the fire scene, it's done. I mean, that is your safety. He's responsible for your safety, but you're responsible for you. You're always responsible for you on the fire scene. But I think that's interesting. I don't know that I've ever seen on a fire scene somebody bring in a fresh crew specifically for overhaul. But again, when you're tired, you make mistakes, you get hurt. So it's important to keep that in mind whenever you're on the fire scene. Whenever you're doing overhaul, don't take down walls or beams that may cause structural collapse. I mean, it sounds kind of silly and obvious, but if you work with some firemen, you know that that's probably possible. So stay aware of your environment and what you're pulling down. More safety considerations. It's not always an ideal environment. We get called out in 100-degree weather for a fire. It's icy, it's snowy. You know, you've been throwing a ton of water on this structure and it's below freezing. I mean, temperatures and it's just not always ideal when you're fighting fire. I guess it's never ideal when you're fighting fire. Again, smoldering areas can burst into flames. If you don't have that charged hose line and you're pulling down ceiling or drywall and you have flames, I mean, you're not prepared. You always have to be prepared. That can't be new information. The air's not safe to breathe. I mean, you're in a fire scene, you wouldn't go into a fire without wearing your SCBA and your mask. I mean, you've heard the air after a fire is put out, when you know how maybe worse than when the fire was actually actively burning. Be aware of that.
Why would that be? Why would that be?
Because they're still in the air. They're not gone.
What
They're
is
still in the environment.
What?
Cyanide, carbon monoxide. I mean, all kinds of. I mean, you never know what you can list some things, but you never know what's in the house and the structure. I guess it's kind of limitless. You have meth labs. People do all kinds of crazy stuff. All you can do is always wear your PPE. Always be prepared. Dangerous equipment in close quarters. All the tools that are used in overhaul. You've got axes, you've got pickhead axes, you've got haligans, you've got pike poles, you've got saws. And these are firemen with these pieces of equipment. And they're in close proximity to you. And you're doing the same thing. So always be aware of where you are, people around you, so that nobody gets hurt, you don't get hurt. Just things to think about. Again, we've already covered this and we'll probably cover it several more times. The air is not safe. Wear your PPE. It's not cool. I don't know how many of you have been on a fire scene and actually seen firefighters wearing PPE while they're in overhaul. I feel like it's probably not the more popular thing to do because those tanks are heavy. We all want out of the equipment as soon as possible. Like I said, you've been on scene for hours already. You're tired, you're sweaty, you just want a little bit of a break. The shoulders are aching from those packs. But for your safety, keep it on. Keep it on for a little while longer. Until your IC, whoever's in charge, tells you that the environment is safe enough to get rid of it. And even in that case, if you feel like it's not, keep it on. You don't get dinged for not keeping it on, or for keeping it on. So it's totally up to you. It's your health. You have the safety officer present, going through and making sure while you're doing overhaul that the structures stay on. Because it's an ever-changing environment. You're pulling things down. The environment is changing all around you. You need to be aware also, but you do have the safety officer that's going through and watching all this happen as well. Again, it's everyone's responsibility. You have chiefs on scene, you have captains, you have your IC, but it's also your responsibility to keep an eye on the changing environment as well. Indicators of possible collapse, we're going to go over some of those. Some of them are obvious, some of them are less obvious. And again, don't compromise. Don't be the one that pulls down the wall or the beam that puts everybody in danger. Be aware. Now this guy, this thing is, I think that's a total loss. That's a joke. So lightweight truss and on construction, like the metal gusset plates, we've all seen those. They fell under high heat, like I think it's in 10 minutes or something ridiculous. I mean, 10 minutes, are you even on scene in the building yet? I mean, those are things to think about. I think those are super common as well. Cracked walls are out of alignment. I mean, those, you've seen all the different types of structural collapses, the pancake and all that. I mean, watch your walls. The sagging floors and heavy equipment on roof, that could be from, all the water that you've thrown, the accumulation of water that you've been throwing all day on the structure. Just poor construction, the heavy equipment you've been in the warehouses with the ACs on the roofs, pile that on with the water that you're throwing on there. Those are just all things to think about when you're in an environment like that. As far as fire investigators go, ideally a fire investigator would go through the structure before you start your overhaul. Again, I don't think that's typically what happens, but anytime you are suspect of arson, which is extremely hard to prove, I mean, it's rare they ever prove it, I think. But if you see anything, when you enter a fire scene and you see anything that looks suspicious, make sure that you preserve whatever evidence there is of that. So a fire investigator can look at it before, you, as firefighters, we destroy things. Make sure you preserve that. Make sure you're looking, being aware of things like that when you go into a fire scene. I think this is interesting. The burn patterns. on walls, the Oakland warehouse fire, they think was started by the refrigerator because there was a burn pattern from the electrical cord. I mean, you remember that fire just a couple weeks ago, it's awful. We'll talk more about that too. Again, anything suspicious, note it, preserve it until the fire investigator can get to it. So we're only going to talk about a couple types of construction, wood frame and balloon. So in this picture, obviously it's been well destroyed by a fire, but all these pockets are places where fire can hide, up in the ceiling. I mean, all these nooks and crannies. It's so important when you do an overhaul that you tear that drywall down. I know there is a point where you want to preserve somebody's property, but more important than preserving the property is making sure that it's out. Be thorough. So this is the balloon frame housing. And if you pull on scene and you know that you're pulling on scene to a balloon frame structure, you need to be thinking that fire can start in the lowest space in the basement and move straight up these walls all the way to the top floor without ever affecting any of these floors here. Go straight to the attic and be unseen. So as a firefighter, if you recognize that construction, you need to go and do a thorough investigation on every floor. Every floor needs to be investigated. Pull that drywall, make sure that that fire is not traveled unseen to the top floor. So we talked about the wood structures, the balloon frame, any opening or void space fire can travel to. It's real sneaky. Don't be fooled. So we're going to talk about location and cause of fire a little bit. I remember when I was in the academy when we talked about mansard roofs. They scared me to death. We had a terrible fire, I don't know how long, it's been about 10 years ago, that involved a mansard roof. And this particular picture was taken last month on a fire that I was actually on. It was not a fun fire to be on. We were on scene for 5.5 hours. There was no interior attack. It was crazy. But all the fire was down here, and I mean it was rolling. And the funny thing is, all the overhaul was done on the other end of the apartments.
Hey Jade, we had an OPG change after that fire 10 years ago about, I can't exactly remember what it is. What are we supposed to do when we get on the scene and we have a mansard roof?
Immediately call for a second alarm.
That's what it was. Thank you.
You're welcome. Excellent question. So all the overhaul was done basically on the other side of the apartment because it had traveled through these eaves all the way down here. After being on scene for 5 hours and thinking that this was out and all the overhaul had been done, we're getting ready to leave, and one of these eaves literally starts smoking, and within a matter of minutes, caught right back on fire.
So why an overhaul on a massive roof? Is that so, I mean, what makes that important?
Because it can hide in here.
What causes it to, you made the point that all the overhaul was done on the other side. And then why did that happen?
All the void spaces. The void space all the way along this roof, fire can travel. It's kind of like the balloon frame without even being seen on the other side. Travels right down the edge of the building.
So how does it travel that way? I mean, is it like a bus? Is it?
No, it's a void space.
Okay.
All open spaces.
I understand that. So it's not going to burn through before it travels around?
No, sir.
So
Travel through it.
What causes it to travel through it?
I mean,
what causes, you're telling me that when I get there, I have to make sure that I go to the other side and I check it and all. What's something I can do to prevent that?
Ventilation.
Or what causes that to happen?
Ventilation before it gets a chance to move. Which I think that on this particular fire,
Okay, when you said ventilate, how
open it up. Open it up before it has a chance to spread.
Okay,
Cut it off.
Why am I opening it up?
To cut it off, to bring the fire here, keep it from spreading out farther.
Okay. Just a teaching point on that, okay? On a mansard roof, if I come in and my fire's right there, the thing is, I'm actually causing the vector system. And the thing is, the heat. Do what?
Go ahead.
The heat is actually pushing the fire around. And thing, so it's causing its own tornado. And also when it causes its own tornado, it's pushing the fire around. So whenever we make that cut, we're actually cutting the fire off.
Right. When you do the ventilation, you cut it, yeah. They actually, on this, they wanted to get ventilation on this before it got this far, but literally, when we got on scene, it was a matter of 3 or 4 minutes, and there was no getting on that roof right there. None. It went up that fast. But, thank you. So yeah, I think that mansard roofs are terrifying. Like we said, if you pull up on scene for a mansard roof fire, you automatically call for a second alarm because they're dangerous. Location and cause, this picture I thought was funny I mean, it's, again, nobody has on masks or even SCBAs. But you can see that the fire obviously started on the stove. You have the charred wall in the back, and you can see where the ceiling's been charred. He's holding, see to make sure that there was no fire spread from the stove into the roof. So using your senses on a fire scene, it sounds, simple and whatever, but again, you're the only one who's ultimately responsible for you. Always be looking at your environment. Your environment on a fire scene is going to change constantly. You can't trust a fire scene. Always be looking. Listen. A lot of times you can go into a structure that's on fire, smoked out. You can't see the fire. If you get close enough, you can feel it. If everybody will be quiet, you'll hear it. But you've got to all kind of work together and listen. I mean, use your senses. Again, when you get close enough, you start to feel it. Use the back of your hand if you need to feel walls before making entry. So the tools, lots of tools for our overhaul. More so, I think, than for getting on the end of the nozzle, depending on if you're, I think it's more. Anyway, there's saws, we've got hook poles, picket axes, Alligans, tons of tools to choose from. Everybody has their own favorite. This is the one that I like. I like a little shorter handle because I'm not real tall, and I can do a lot of damage with this guy if I need to. Crowbars, Alligans, I'm going to talk about those. Super important, hand line for all overhaul work. Make sure you have a hand line. Truck work is super important. This is another great reason overhaul is so fantastic. The trucks have generators. Obviously, we talked about earlier how a fire scene is not ideal. A lot of times we get called on a fire scene in the middle of the night. It's dark. We got to cut the power. So the trucks come on scene with generators. They give us lights. Some of the lights they set up actually have electrical outlets so you can have access to other tools that you need to use. And the vent fans, gas power, obviously. So these are my must-haves on a fire scene. Charge line. Personal light, which our department just issued everyone their own personal light. I think that if you have your own personal light on some departments, at least the equipment has lights that you can use. And then the thermal imaging camera, which I think is super interesting because I don't think it's something that we've had around forever, but obviously something that's well utilized now, and I'm going to show you some in a second. I wanted to put this in here. Anytime you're doing overhaul and you have anything in the house, a smoldering item, I always think of a mattress because they just go up like, Roman candle. Get it out of the house. Get those things out of the house, out of the structure, and away from the structure. So if they do finally catch back on fire, the structure is not impacted. So the Oakland warehouse fire, I mean, totally devastating. I think the death toll was over 30 people, something like that. Can't even imagine that fire scene. So this structure does not sound to go in and go with your axes and ceiling hooks. You can't go in there and do that with this guy. It's not safe. So what do? Because you have people that are missing, right? Drones and thermal imaging cameras. I think it's crazy because that's something that couldn't even be done 5 years ago, probably. And obviously, no one survived, but I think it's crazy the things that they can do now. So importance of overhaul. No one likes a rekindle. Again, I said earlier, I feel like a department's reputation can hinge on how many times structures catch back on fire. This was the church down on Gallatin just this past week, caught on fire. It caught on fire at 4 in the afternoon, came in, they put it out, and they actually cut a hole in the ceiling at that time. The fire started in the basement. So they came in, put it out, cut a hole in the ceiling, and it rekindled several hours later, and just, there was no hope putting it out, which looks very, in my opinion, it looks very suspicious. But also, when they cut that hole in the roof and it rekindled. And that night, the wind gusts were like 20 miles per hour. I mean, it's a perfect storm. So I've got a little video about this one. I don't know if y'all seen it or not. Watch the news with it.
An East Nashville church burned to the ground after it caught fire, was put out by fire crews, and then caught fire again. News Channel 5's Jessica Knutson explains how this all happened.
Firefighters were initially called out to the church for a fire in the basement about 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, and they were able to get that fire out no problem. But then they were called back hours later, and they found the church fully engulfed in flames. People watched in disbelief on Sunday night as Eastminster Presbyterian Church erupted in flames.
It's heartbreaking. I mean, it's heart-wrenching to see a church in flames that's been here for so long and helped so many people.
At 4 o'clock, after Sunday's services, the church caught
So it could be a hole right there.
fire. Firefighters responded and knocked out the flames with only minor damage to the building. But unfortunately, the fire department had to respond to the church a second time.
45 minutes, they would call me back and said, Pastor, the fire returned.
The church, which has been on Gallatin Road for more than half a century, burned to the ground.
We lost our whole building and our sanctuary. It's extremely sad. Probably one of the saddest nights of my life to see the church place where we worship completely gone.
Today, members of the congregation surveyed the damage, comforting each other and thinking of better times.
We got married in this church 37 years ago.
A happy memory, but a sad realization that their son, who is set to be married next year, can't have that same experience.
Just heartbreak, really is. Just heartbreak.
The congregation plans to stick together, knowing that with no one hurt, everything else can be rebuilt.
Certainly, as a church, we need the prayers of the people. And certainly, we will need some finances help as well.
At this time, the cause of the fire has not been